Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to today's edition of Read TFOS, where I take old stories of the narrated and update them to modern audio standards. This particular story is called Endoskeleton, written by Fisser946. Kirik waved his appendages in the air in frustration. He was confident that he was one of the best fighters in the pit, a subterranean arena where Xenos of all creeds and nations came to fight for glory and credits. And he had been advancing through the ranks rapidly ever since the debut of his career. A recent fight with Kakudu, a massive juk with an inch-thick carapace, had ended in defeat, and he had been forced to fight some lower-ranking opponents to move his way back up. Though he knew it was necessary to face fighters that were beneath him, this was too much to ask for. I've standards, damn it. But the hell is this? You expect me to fight that thing? It's absurd. Just look at it. It's got no exoskeleton. It's only got 2 arms. You may as well throw an amputee in the ring. It's beneath me to fight. Kirik crossed both sets of arms as he shouted at his coach. His opponent in question was a soft-bodied Xeno with only 4 appendages and only 2 forward-facing eyes. 2 of the 4 appendages were devoted to standing, and Kirik couldn't fathom how he was able to balance with so few. Xenos without protective carapaces weren't unheard of, but they were usually small and reproduced incredibly rapidly to survive as a species. Some garden worlds with little competition and plentiful food facilitated the evolution of intelligent soft-bodied species, though they were hardly fit for medium to heavy work, let alone fighting in the pit. Soft-bodied Xenos rarely even made it off of their cradle planet due to the delicate nature of their bodies. This was the first time Kirk, or anyone in the audience for that matter, had seen one up close. It was both repulsive and comical, to say the least. Yeah, shut up. Why don't you? You think that you get to pick off the shit show with Kakuda? Kirik made a face at that comment. Half the fighters in the pit knew Kakuda was using illegal substances to facilitate his unnatural size and strength, which was against the rules, but no one called him out because of the other half of the fighters were using synthetic hormones and chemical stimulants as well. Kirik prided himself on sticking to the original spirit of the fight. It was supposed to be a brutal clash between 2 insectoids using nothing other than their natural gifts to survive. There were very few rules in the pit, namely, no artificial weapons, no performance-enhancing substances, and, most importantly, no mercy. Get the hell in there and squash the fucking thing, so that we can get this farce out of the way and get you moving back up the ranks to fight in the championship. You want to get revenge on that cheating bastard Kakuda, don't you? Kirk nodded angrily. Then get your big fat shell down there and fight. Just try not to spray its guts in my direction, or I'll come up and kick your ass myself. Kirik's coach, Tug, was a 3-armed Gakatan with his fighting days behind him. His brightly patterned shell had faded over the years, but his language only grew more colorful as time passed, and he was still a fine trainer. Kirik stood nearly twice his height, but he always looked up to Tug's fighting career. Tug had won the championship 3 cycles running, before the big nasty Craig tore one of his arms off, forcing him to retire. Yeah, fine, whatever. No promises about splattering you with guts, though, Kirik chittered through his mandibles as he strutted past noisy crowds to the center of the arena. Tug pushing and shoving through the masses. Kirik felt several appendages touch his shell, and the die-hard fan nearly halted his procession with the offer to bear his brood. Tug swore loudly and pushed her out of the way. Kirik wiggled his antenna affectionately as he passed, as a sort of apology to his clearly delusional admirer. She was a completely different species. Kirik's 4 legs moved him smoothly over the sloping ground, down to the stone in the center. The dirt floor had been firmly packed by millions of passing Xenos, come to watch the fighting, and the high ceiling was dotted with electric lanterns, casting a yellowish glow on the entire chamber. The pit itself was a massive burrow, hidden from the outside world and only accessible by those with the inclination and the credits. It had originally been a Queen Saruk's chambers, when the planet had still been young, but the Queen was now no more than a figurehead, and the people of the dry world were no longer completely hers. The Skuraks composed less than half of the population, and interspecies feuds were commonplace on this diverse world. The government appeased the crowds with periodic fights available to all for viewing, and social unrest was kept at a perpetual simmer. However, surface fighting had not been enough to slake some individual's thirst for violence. Those fighters didn't offer what the pit did. The pit offered blood and lots of it, just like the surface fights. Two fighters would climb upon a stone for 6 6-minute rounds, punctuated at the beginning and end by loud sirens. The stone had originally been an actual boulder when the first fights were fought, but had since been reduced to a flat, standardized circle, slightly raised above the ground level to emulate a stunned cylinder of sorts. The difference with illegal pit fights was that they usually ended before the sixth siren could mark the end of the third round. Usually, only one Xeno ever left to climb down the stone, as fighters in the pit frequently fought to the death. Winners were declared when their opponent was dead or no longer fit to fight, but the two conditions weren't mutually exclusive, and those who lost due to the disability only ever left with their lives thanks to the siren marking the end of the round. Carrick climbed upon the stone to the cheers of his loyal fans. He had been a crowd favorite since before his match with Kakuda, and even after his humiliating defeat, many saw him as an unlikely winner of the championship. That only made their cheering more fervent and even served to draw more of their fans. If there was one thing that was true across most races, it was that everyone loved a long shot. There were also those who supported whoever they believed had the best shot of winning, or simply because they'd supported that Xeno in the past. Carrick felt thousands of multifaceted eyes fixated on him as he held his forearms up and turned for the audience. He had a good mix of all three groups tonight. The spongy Xeno at the other end of the stone was sitting on the ledge with the great big black Murray standing before it that Carrick could only assume was the Xeno's coach. He scoffed when he saw them. That Murray must have been pretty stupid to invest the time and energy into such a squishy fighter, if he could even consider it one. The two were speaking in low voices, though Carrick knew that a creature such as that could not hope to emulate the precise clicks and the delicate chittering of the common language. Interworld basic. Soft, flabby orifices such as his own were clumsy and moist, completely unlike the delicate and exact mouthparts which most Xenos possessed. Beneath the stone, a seething mass of Xenos chittered, chirped, clattered, and crawled against one another in anticipation for the fight. Up on top, Carrick could see that the turnout was rather poor compared to his usual fights, probably on account of his meek competition, he surmised. Good, he thought. At least there'll be fewer eyes to see this mockery of a pit fighting. Hanging from a distant ceiling and supported by their silk threads, the Twok mediator looked like a disgusting yellow and grey carapace covered in a multitude of seemingly randomly placed appendages. Numerous tiny black eyes peered hungrily from her minuscule head, hanging at what Carrick guessed was the bottom of her body. The only rule she enforced in the pit was that the sirens marked the end of each bout. In Toog's day, there were no rounds, but the fights were too short for the taste of the crowds, and had since been lengthened by giving fighters short respites between trying to pummel each other into oblivion. It also served to calm the fans long enough for vendors to make their way through the pit to sell food and refreshments, as well as workers for the pit to take wages on the fighters. The breaks had more than quadrupled the pit's revenue. The mediator looked quite silly, or horrifying depending on how you looked at her, but she had hidden strength in her many spindly legs, and was quick to restrain unruly fighters with her strong threads of silk. Carrick gave a shudder of revulsion as she slowly lowered herself over the center of the stone to better observe. Then he and the Xeno migrated to stand beneath her. Up close, he could sense that his opponent was also uncomfortable with the horrific figures overhead, and he could inspect the Xeno in greater detail. It was a little taller than Carrick, and thin brown skin stretched over fleshy bulges beneath. It looked to him as though large maggots were struggling beneath its skin, ready to tear out any moment, and he suspected they would burst upon impact. On top of its head, it cultured a black kind of fuzz, a mold perhaps, or maybe a natural growth. Carrick noticed that the black fuzz also appeared over the Xeno's large eyes and in the crotch of its underarms. Sparse fuzz lightly dusted its arms and legs, and a strange garment covered the region between its waist and its knees. Its grotesque lips were pulled taut, slightly curving upwards at the ends as it held out a hand to what Carrick thought must have been a strange gesture from its homeworld. The siren suddenly rang to mark the beginning of the first round, and before his shocked opponent could pull back its appendage, He grabbed it and pulled it closer to himself with 2 hands. Using its weight against it, he met its momentum with a tightly balled fist in face. He half expected its head to explode on impact, but to its credit, the Xeno simply fell over. Something hard met his hand beneath the layers of fat and skin, and Kerrick's wrist felt sore. The dark Mariri was screaming for the fleshy Xeno to get back up, even as Kerrick knocked it back down again. His opponent had a gash between its eye and where Kerrick's hard fist had met its soft face, and he was shocked to see that it wasn't the customary blue or green, but red blood pouring onto the stone. He continued his flurry of hits against his opponent, expecting the fragile flesh to give way with each strike and being disappointed each time. The Xeno tried to roll away to avoid the punches and scratches and attempt to stand several times, pushing itself up on its 2 front appendages. Kerrick easily followed its movements across the stone, knocking it back down each time it tried to get back up. The crowd was in hysterics, and he could hear Tug yelling for him to stop goofing off. Just as Kerrick was winding up for another powerful strike against the downed Xeno, the siren rang, marking the end of the first round. Kerrick turned around to go back to his coach. Xenos of all shapes and sizes began making their way out of hidden tunnels in the floor and walls of the pit to sell food, drink, and take wages. He turned to Tug to partake in a little water for himself, but the 3-armed Gakatan pushed him in the chest. "What the fuck was that, huh? You're some sort of wise guy, you hear that?" Tug tilted his head in mock listening. "They're laughing. You're supposed to be some sort of badass. You ought to hang up your career and take a job shitting out jokes if that's the kind of fight you're giving them. You got shit for brains, don't you? What did I tell you? What did I fucking tell you? I told you to kill it. I told you to get this damn joke out of the way, but instead you play along. Why I oughta—" Tug's tirade continued on as Kerrick took a drink offered by a fan. Kerrick kept his mandibles still. He didn't know what to say. Something wasn't right with the soft body on stone. It may have looked as though he were toying with it to Tug and the audience, but Kerrick made every blow count. It didn't make sense to him. It felt malleable beneath his hands, and its flesh shook and jerked every time he hit it. But it simply wasn't bursting like he would have expected a soft-bodied Xeno to burst. Kerrick turned his back to Tug as he made his way back to the center of the stone for the next round. Perhaps its skin was too tough. Yeah, that's got to be it. Its skin is holding it together. Kerrick moved to face his opponent, raising all 4 of his arms in a dangerous array. The vendors had left, and the crowds were anticipating a brutal second round. The Twok mediator watched silently overhead. Turning to look at his opponent, Kerrick noticed that the gash on his face had been coated in a translucent gel of sorts. Both of its arms were raised in front of it, the hands and the ends balled into tight fists. He wasn't smiling anymore. The siren rang, and Kerrick felt a boulder smash into the delicate mandibles as the Xeno fired one of its long skin-covered limbs into his face. Kerrick instinctively backed off as he reached to his mouth to assess the damage, but the Xeno didn't let up. It stepped forward and struck him again, this time in the crook of his upper and lower left arms. Kerrick felt the impact, but the exoskeleton remained intact. He scuttled to the right and tried to hit the Xeno with several powerful bashes. Only one hit landed before the soft-bodied Xeno backed out of reach. For something that was supposed to be fragile, it felt unnaturally solid. Realizing that he had overextended himself, Kerrick tried to back up. However, before he could contract his forward body back into a balanced position, the Xeno had already circled to his left and had closed in. Blow after powerful blow erupted between his 2 left arms as the delicate Xeno fired its unsettlingly hard fist into the exact same spot as before. Kerrick finally convulsed and threw off his assailant as the spot quickly blossomed with pain. He distanced himself from his doughy opponent before it could stand up once more. Kerrick looked at himself to assess the damage, and was shocked to see a hole in the crotch between his 2 left arms, where the Xeno fist had broken through his grey chitin. Green blood oozed lazily through the wound, and Kerrick felt suddenly very dizzy at the realization of his injuries. He fell in the growing puddle of his own blood as he struggled to close the hole with his hands, but it continued to seep between the segments of his fingers. He turned to see the Xeno looming over him. There wasn't much time left before the siren, but Kerrick knew it was the end. The Xeno knelt down and pressed its pliable hands against the wound it had inflicted. Its soft flesh pressed against its hard exoskeleton to make a near-perfect seal, and it began shouting at the crowd in an unintelligible tongue. It turned its head to the left and right, screeching in a strange language as it tried to remedy the damage it had done. The siren rang to mark the end of the second round. Before Kerrick's mind slipped into oblivion, a single thought drifted across his mind. Nobody follows the damned rules. Kerrick awoke to the gentle caresses of Toog's hand slapping him hard between his antennae. Colors and shapes became solid images as his consciousness returned. Reaching up with a shaky right arm to halt the assault, he tried to murmur out protest. "Arsehole! What in the 6 cells was that? You almost died, you piece of shit!" Tug berated him before he could speak. Kerrick could see the distraught Zeno talking to the Mariri at the edge of the stone. He must have not been unconscious for very long. Remembering his wound, Kerrick reached with his lower right arm across his body to feel the hardened foam of an emergency patch sealing his hole. The paltry crowds had all but left, though a few individuals had stuck around to meet the new fighter. "Piff, biff, kill, tick, piffed." Kerrick tried to speak, but his mouth parts weren't moving as they were supposed to, and it felt as though they weren't as many as before. Standing up, he made his way over to his opponent, despite the glares Toog was sending his way. Kerrick walked around the stone to the opposite side, and as he approached, the jet-black Mariri stopped its constellation and nodded in his direction. The Xeno turned to face him before standing up abruptly, chattering in its liquid language. Before either of them could meet, the Mariri injected itself between the two fighters. The Xeno continued to blabber behind the Mariri, peeking over its shoulder to look at Kerrick as it blathered on. "Hey, whoa, Kerrick, slow down, listen. Before you do anything rash, my human just wants to let you know it's sorry. I tried to explain that it's all part of the sport, but the dumb thing can barely understand a lick of interworld basic. It says it lost its cool after the first round, whatever the hell's that means." The Mariri waved its spindly arms as it talked, gesturing wildly at the air. "Just calm down, okay? You're lucky the stupid thing acted so quickly, or it would have killed you, you know. I hope you're not looking for another fight, that's all I'm saying." Kerrick chose not to say anything. Not that he could. Instead, he pushed the large Mariri out of the way and extended a hand towards the blubbering human. It ceased its talking and took his hand firmly in one of its own, shaking them slightly. It smiled up at him. "Hey, you son of a twuck! What the fuck do you think you're doing?" The moment of peace was not long-lived, as Toog stumped over and furiously pulled Kerrick away from the human. "You brainless buffoon! That piece of shit nearly killed you, and you go back to make a gaga faces at it. You get hit too hard in the head or something." Toog looked at his face as they made their way to the exit. "That fucking Xeno really did a number on you, for fuck's sakes. Wait till we find you a mirror. Your face is all sorts of messed up. I'd be surprised if you can talk at all once we get your mouth fixed. Hello? Is Kerrick in there? Your brains get scrambled or something?" Kerrick allowed his coach to ramble on as they made their way up and out of the pit. Kerrick felt oddly satisfied despite his terrible day. His career wasn't over, thanks to the confused misgivings of the other fighter, but he wouldn't get his chance to fight for the championship. Losers in the pit usually died, so kind of the prize money wasn't reserved for him, and he suspected they lost a good chunk of his fans and all of his dignity. He'd lost to a soft-bodied alien. He'd need at least a cycle for his exoskeleton to grow back in, and a good long string of worn fights in his career were to recover. Kerrick doubted that Toog would ease up in the training while he healed, and his buy-in to the championship had been lost with that last fight. Still, despite his embarrassing defeat and altogether dismal day, he couldn't wait to see what the human would do to the Gakuda. End of story. I'd greatly like to thank our Tier 5 channel members, Casper Arnholtz, John Creighton, Manatharia, 050, Dragzoon WRE, and Elijah Silvercross. Thank you very much.